This happened about 2 years ago. Even now, the memory still surfaces from time to time, stabbing at my mind. I'm writing this because I don't want anyone else to experience the kind of danger I did. That afternoon, I was shopping at Trader Joe's when I heard a woman's voice beside me. "Pick whatever you want. I'll cook it for you." At first, I assumed she was talking to someone else. I looked around, but there was no one near me. She was looking directly at me. I was confused. Why would a stranger offer to cook for a man she'd never met? Did she somehow know I lived alone? Then I really looked at her. She was exactly my type. My first thought was that it had to be some kind of prank. I scanned the store looking for anyone filming us, but there were no cameras, just normal shoppers minding their own business. Before I could even respond, she started grabbing groceries and dropping them into my cart. I let out a sigh without realizing it, half confusion, half excitement. I didn't stop her because I was lonely. When you've been single for a long time, turning down a beautiful woman feels like refusing a fresh pizza after days of starving. Somehow, we ended up with a cart full of groceries and went back to my place together. The moment she stepped inside, she rushed straight into the kitchen and started cooking. A part of me thought, this isn't right. I didn't even know who she was. I should have stopped right then. But another part of me was already imagining a special night. Before long, she had already finished cooking several dishes and started setting them on the table. I told her it looked like way too much food. Then her expression changed instantly. "No," she said flatly. "You're eating all of this tonight." Her eyes were different now, cold, almost hostile. I froze. She grabbed a fork, twisted a huge clump of spaghetti around it, and shoved it straight into my mouth. The moment it touched my tongue, a searing pain shot through it, like I'd put something burning straight onto my tongue. A harsh chemical smell shot up my nose. I spat it out and yelled, "What the hell is this?" She walked over to the sink, picked up a can of oven cleaner, and smiled. "You put that in the spaghetti?" I screamed. Her eyes widened unnaturally as she replied, "Yeah, your filthy mouth smells like other women. I couldn't stand it anymore." Then she started walking toward me, still holding the oven cleaner. That's when it finally hit me. She wasn't normal. I ran for the front door. Behind me, I heard loud crashing sounds. I glanced back and saw her pulling on a mask and rubber gloves, holding a knife. I bolted outside and called 911 while running. My throat and chest felt like they were burning from the inside. She screamed after me, "Where do you think you're going? You still have to drink the Drano! If you don't stop, I'll cut your legs off!" I ran until my lungs felt like they were going to explode. When I looked back, she was sprinting toward me at full speed, knife in hand. Then I heard sirens. An ambulance pulled up, and I practically jumped inside. Luckily, I had spat the spaghetti out immediately, so I didn't suffer serious physical damage. She was arrested. Later, the police told me the truth. I looked almost exactly like her ex-boyfriend. She believed I was him, and what she did to me was meant as revenge for his cheating. But I had never seen her before that day. Even after being arrested, she insisted I was her ex. She was later found to be suffering from a mental illness. After that night, I suffered from intense social anxiety for a long time. This story didn't happen to me. It happened to my math teacher back in the 1980s. When my teacher, let's call him Joe, was in 5th grade, he was homesick with mono. His parents worked during the day, so he was alone most afternoons. One day, Joe was sitting on the couch watching his favorite game show when the doorbell rang. Back then, you couldn't pause live TV, so he ran toward the door so he wouldn't miss anything. He peeked through the small window by the door and saw a man in his late 30s staring straight back at him. Joe jumped back, but since the man had already seen him, he slowly opened the door a few inches and asked, "Can I help you?" The man said he needed a pen and some paper. Annoyed and eager to get back to his show, Joe ran to the kitchen, grabbed a pen and paper, and handed them to him. As Joe tried to close the door, the man shoved his foot into the gap. "I need somewhere to write a letter," the man said. "Can I come in?" Joe was small, about 70 pounds, and too innocent to realize the danger, so he let the man inside. The man sat at the dining table and began writing. He crumpled up letter after letter before finally keeping one. He thanked Joe and left. Joe locked the door and threw the discarded letters away. Then the phone rang. It was Joe's dad, calling to check on him. Joe told him everything was fine, when suddenly the doorbell rang again. It was loud enough that Joe's dad heard it through the phone and told him to answer the door. Joe opened it. It was the same man. He said he wanted the letters Joe had thrown away. Joe ran to the trash, grabbed the papers, and turned around, only to bump straight into the man. The man had followed him inside. The man sat back down at the table with the letters. Joe slowly walked to the phone and told his dad what was happening. Suddenly, the line went dead. Joe turned and saw the man leaning against the phone, pressing down the button to hang it up, staring directly at him. Joe didn't know it, but since his dad had made the call, he could still hear everything on the other end. I'm not completely sure, but that's apparently how landline phones worked back then. When Joe's dad said he was calling the police, the man bolted out the door. Joe ran upstairs, locked himself in his parents' bedroom, and waited with a rifle until his dad came home. The man was arrested a few miles away. Years later, when Joe told us this story, he said, "That house was completely isolated. If my dad hadn't called, I don't think anyone would have heard me scream." This is something that actually happened to my uncle's father, and even now, thinking about it still gives me chills. I'll call him William. William was a well-known politician. One night, he went to bed as usual. A few hours later, he woke up and saw a woman standing over him. Her foot pressed firmly against his chest as she stared down at him. He was terrified. He couldn't move. Eventually, he fell back asleep. This went on for several weeks. Eventually, he couldn't take it anymore, so he had his bodyguard sleep in the room with him. A few days later, he went to see a priest. As soon as the priest arrived, he said it looked like someone had put black magic on him. William was horrified. The priest told him that to break the curse, a ritual would need to be performed at midnight. William agreed. On the night of the ritual, as the priest began chanting prayers, the woman who had been tormenting William appeared once again. The priest commanded her to leave him alone, but she shook her head and said she couldn't because she was bound to him. In a chilling voice, she said that to undo the spell, they would have to go to the place where the magic had first been created. The priest demanded that she show them. She nodded and led them to a construction site nearby. Apparently, things like this weren't uncommon in the area where William and my uncle lived. The woman pointed to a specific spot in the ground. William and the priest dug for about 30 minutes before uncovering something buried there, a small box containing a voodoo doll and several of William's personal belongings. The sight of it was so horrifying that William threw the box away and began vomiting. The priest burned the box and everything inside it. The woman vanished as if she had never been there. Sometime later, William told my uncle about what had happened. Curious, my uncle asked him exactly when it had occurred. When William told him the date, my uncle was shaken. Around that time, my uncle had been lying in bed with his dog when the dog suddenly jumped up, ran toward a mirror, and began barking at it. My uncle thought it was strange, but didn't think much of it. The next day, he was told that his mother had dreamed of him being dragged away by some kind of animal. She said the creature was so massive that it didn't seem like something that could exist on Earth. The dream ended there, and my uncle dismissed it as nothing more than a disturbing coincidence. That was, until he realized what William had been going through at the exact same time. So my question is this: who put the black magic on William? And what would have happened if he hadn't asked the priest for help in time? I'm a 34-year-old man, and this happened about 2 years ago. At the time, I was working night shifts at a warehouse. My car had broken down, so I was using Uber to get to and from work. That night, I got off around 2 a.m. and called an Uber like I always did. A driver named Mark was assigned. I remember his rating was pretty decent. A few minutes later, his car pulled up, a dark gray Toyota Camry. The windows were heavily tinted, darker than usual. I always try to be polite, so I greeted him when I got in. He had long hair that went down to his shoulders, and he was wearing a necklace and several large rings on his fingers. Once we started driving, we made some light small talk. About work, about life, nothing unusual at first. Then, out of nowhere, he said,
"If anyone tries to get into the car, don't open the door, no matter what."
I was confused and asked him who would try to get in. He just smiled and said,
You never know,"
and laughed it off. I figured he was just a little weird and that I'd be home soon anyway, so I didn't think much of it. Once we got on the highway, I was looking at my phone when he suddenly whispered, "Shh." I looked up and said, "What?" He didn't respond. About 10 seconds later, he whispered again,
"Be quiet."
I had no idea what was happening. I asked him, "Are you okay?" In a tense, irritated whisper, he snapped,
"Can't you hear the knocking?"
His expression darkened instantly. I listened as hard as I could, but there was nothing, no sound at all. We were speeding down the highway. There was no way anyone could be knocking on the car. Then he pressed down on the gas. The car started picking up speed. His head began jerking back and forth like he was having some kind of spasm. The car drifted and swerved slightly from side to side. I told him to slow down. He didn't respond. Something felt seriously wrong. I shouted at him to pull over. That's when he said, in a low voice,
"It's already too late."
I didn't understand anything anymore. I saw him staring at me through the rearview mirror. "Are you joking right now?" I asked, my voice shaking. Suddenly, he turned around and looked straight at me.
"Didn't you see the driver switch?"
I just stared at him, stunned. His eyes looked completely different, like he wasn't the same person anymore. The car was still flying down the road, but he was looking at me instead of the road. I screamed at him to look forward. The car swerved hard. He snapped his eyes forward and kept driving. Then he started laughing under his breath and said,
"Hey, Mark. Want to see what this guy's blood looks like tonight? You're the one going to prison anyway."
I had no idea what he was talking about, but I knew something was seriously wrong. I hit the SOS button on the app. He kept muttering to himself, like there was someone else in the car with us. As soon as the call connected to 911, I yelled for help. That's when he suddenly pulled over onto the shoulder. He started shaking his head violently and screamed, "Run!" I threw the door open and ran as fast as I could. When I glanced back, he was out of the car and running toward me. Then suddenly stopped, scanning the area like he was confused. He opened the trunk and started rummaging through it, then got back into the driver's seat. Moments later, he got out again and went back to the trunk, searching frantically. When I looked again, he was standing still, staring into empty space, not at me. Then he got back into the car and drove away. I stood there in the middle of the desert, shaking uncontrollably, waiting for the police to arrive. When they finally did, they told me they would track down the Uber driver and arrest him. I eventually made it home, but the shaking didn't stop. The questions kept repeating in my head all night. What was he planning to do to me? Who or what was he talking to? I still don't have the answers, but that night, remains the most terrifying night of my life. Hello, Wansi. My name is Avi. The story I'm about to tell you happened in the winter of 2017. At the time, I was 12 years old and suffering from chickenpox. I'd been on strong medication, and it left me weak and constantly exhausted. One night, I was supposed to take my medicine at midnight, but by a little after 9 p.m., I was already struggling to stay awake. My mom laid me down in bed and told me she would wake me up when it was time to take my medicine. That night, we were staying at my grandmother's house. My siblings and I slept on makeshift beds on the floor, facing a window. The window was partially broken, and the missing section had been covered with a wooden board. It was an old house. The door was positioned just above my head. That night, all of my siblings were in another room watching a movie, so I was alone in the bedroom. I didn't have a phone back then, so I was just lying there, slowly scanning the room with my eyes. I had no idea what I was about to see. When my gaze stopped on the half-broken window, I noticed something sticking out. It was something I had never noticed before while lying in bed. At first, I thought it was just part of the wooden board. But when I looked closer, I realized it was a face, a young girl's face. Her skin was pale and her eyes were completely white. There were multiple wounds across her face, and she was moving frantically, as if she was desperate to crawl into the room through the window. I was terrified. I shut my eyes and turned to reach for the door, but suddenly, the blanket covering me was yanked toward the window. Then I saw her smiling at me. I screamed. My family came running into the room. I clung to my mother and pointed at the window, but everyone told me there was nothing there. My dad and my brother even walked right up to the window to check. They said they didn't see anything. After I calmed down, I described exactly what I had seen. They told me I must have hallucinated because I was so sick. But even if the face I saw was a hallucination, what about the blanket? My entire family saw that the blanket had been pulled and was lying right next to the window. So I still wonder, if what I saw wasn't real, how did the blanket move on its own? About 9 years ago, I worked briefly in a remote rural area. That's when something happened to me, something I still can't fully explain. At the time, I rented a small house through Airbnb. It took a long drive to get there, but the house itself was beautiful. Wide, open plains stretched out around it in every direction. By the time I arrived, it was already dark, and I went to bed not long after. Sometime deep in the night, I suddenly woke up. I heard the sound of a car pulling up in front of the house. That didn't make any sense at all. The place was completely isolated. There were no other houses nearby, and there was absolutely no reason for anyone to be out here at that hour. I stepped into the living room. That's when I heard footsteps approaching the front door from outside. I looked through the window next to the door and saw someone setting a plate of barbecue down in front of the door. I remember thinking, what kind of situation is this? Who leaves a plate of barbecue on someone's doorstep at 3 a.m? Confused, I called out, "Who is it?" A man answered,
I'm your neighbor. Come have some barbecue with me.
But there were no neighbors anywhere nearby, and that's when I noticed he was wearing a white ski mask. My heart started pounding. I said, "What, a neighbor?" But he ignored me and calmly walked back toward his truck parked behind him. I stood there, stunned, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do. Then I saw him pull something out of the truck. It was long, very long. In his hands was a massive steel skewer, easily 6 to 7 feet long. That's when I realized something was very wrong. He started walking toward the window where I was standing. Without warning, he suddenly thrust the skewer straight at me. The glass shattered instantly, and the skewer shot deep into the house. I threw myself sideways on pure instinct. If I'd been even a second slower, it would have gone straight through my body. I ran to the bedroom, grabbed my phone, and called 911. While I was on the phone, everything outside went quiet. Slowly, I stepped back into the living room. The man was still there, standing outside, looking around. Because of the mask, all I could see in the darkness were his eyes. Those eyes burned into my memory. I still see them. They looked dull and cloudy, almost as if they were covered in fog. I shouted, "What do you want from me?" He didn't answer. Instead, he adjusted his grip and lifted the skewer again. It looked heavy. Trying to control my shaking breath, I yelled, "The police are on their way!" He replied calmly,
Oh yeah? Then I'll just finish you quickly.
I watched as he wiped the skewer with what looked like a cloth. All I could think was that I needed to buy time. I knew it would take a while for the police to reach such a remote place. The window was already broken. If he really wanted to, he could have come inside. But he didn't. He just stood there, staring at me. Then, in a low, cruel voice, he said,
I'm going to put a lot of holes in you.
Fear locked my legs in place, but somehow I forced myself into the kitchen and grabbed a knife. When I looked back at the window, he was gone. I ran into the bathroom and locked the door. Moments later, I heard the sound of boots stepping into the living room. I closed my eyes and cried out to God. The footsteps moved through the house, slowly, deliberately. I backed as far away from the bathroom door as I could. I was sure the massive skewer would come crashing through it at any second. I heard him stop right in front of the door. In that moment, I was certain it was over. But after standing there for about 5 minutes, he turned away. I heard him walk back toward the front door. Then I heard his car start, and finally, the sound of it driving off. Even then, my body wouldn't stop shaking. It wasn't until I heard police sirens outside that I finally unlocked the door. The plate of barbecue at the entrance was gone. I told the police everything that had happened. I never found out if the man was caught. Later, I told my friends about what I'd experienced, but they didn't believe me. And honestly, I don't blame them. It was something almost impossible to imagine. Hello, my name is Jim. The story I'm about to tell you is the first truly mysterious experience of my life, one that I still have a hard time believing, even today. This happened back in 2008, when I was about 8 years old. At the time, I was staying at my grandmother's house. It was late at night, close to bedtime. My grandmother had already gone into her room to sleep, and I was in the living room planning to fall asleep while watching cartoons on TV. Then something entered my field of vision, something I still remember vividly. The bathroom door was slightly open. Inside the dark bathroom, I saw a white cloth gently swaying. At first, I assumed it was just a white towel hanging on the doorknob. But then I wondered, why was it moving? Still, I didn't think much of it. I kept watching TV, and eventually I got sleepy and walked to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of milk, then carried it back to the living room. At some point, the cartoon ended, I turned off the TV, and then turned off the living room lights. That was when I noticed something. In the darkness, the white cloth in the bathroom was still there, still swaying. That's when I felt that something wasn't right. I slowly walked toward the bathroom, and in that moment, through the crack of the open door, I saw something inside. It looked like a black foot. What stood out the most was the skin. It looked extremely dry, almost cracked. It wasn't moving. It was just standing there, completely still. That was when I realized how strange the situation really was. I sprinted to my grandmother's room and shook her awake. I tried to explain what I had seen, but she brushed it off, telling me I must have imagined it. But I was sure of what I saw. I had seen dry human skin, completely drained of color. I described every detail, but she didn't believe me. Eventually, I went back to the living room and lay down on the couch, trying to sleep. That's when I saw it. A dark shadow was moving across the ceiling. The idea of a shadow appearing on the ceiling was hard enough to accept, but the fact that it seemed to be walking made it far more terrifying. There was nothing I could do. I closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep. When I opened them again, it was morning. My grandmother was awake, feeding the dog. Only then did I remember what had happened that night. I went to check the bathroom, but there was nothing there. No towel, nothing white, nothing that could have explained what I saw. That night has remained a mystery, and nearly 18 years later, what I saw is still burned clearly into my memory. So I still ask myself, whose foot was it that I saw?
This happened to me when I was 10 years old. I was born into a broken family. My mother moved to Japan to live with my stepsister, and my father, he died back in 2017. He was shot by thugs in our country. I had no one left, so my grandmother adopted me and brought me to her province. The house we lived in was more like a business property owned by my uncle. Every section of it was separate. If you wanted to go to the kitchen or the bathroom, you had to walk outside in the dark. Since I was new there, I had no friends, and inside the house, things were tense. My aunt and grandmother hated each other, and they fought constantly. I was just a kid, so I didn't understand anything. I only knew the house never felt peaceful. One night after dinner, I checked the time. It was already 10 p.m. That was the only time the water faucet worked, so my grandma told me, "We need to fill the water jugs." She stepped out of the room first. I changed my clothes quickly, but when I looked around, my grandma wasn't beside me anymore. I got scared, so I ran out of the room and into the yard, but she wasn't there either. I looked around and realized there were two paths ahead of me, left or right. I had no idea which way she went, so I chose the right path. I walked only a few steps, and then I saw him, a tall man lying on the ground beside a tree. The night was so dark I couldn't see his face, but I could see his body, shaking like he was having a seizure. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. And then he said my name. Once, twice, 3 times. A deep, slow, creepy voice. I still couldn't move. Then he started throwing small stones at me, one after another. Not hard enough to hurt me, but enough to force me to react. Enough to make me run. So I did. I ran as fast as I could. I spotted my aunt and rushed to her. I asked, out of breath, "Where's Grandma?" She looked confused and said, "She's in the kitchen." I ran there immediately. My grandma scolded me because I didn't help her fill the water jugs. I didn't tell her what I saw. I didn't tell anyone. Not until a few weeks later. When I finally told my grandma, she froze. She stared at me and said something I'll never forget. "No one was there that night, except your aunt and us." She told me it was possible that what I saw was an evil spirit, but I still wonder, can a ghost throw stones? Because I saw them flying. I felt them hit the ground near my feet, and if it was human, how did he know my name?
My name is Pamela. I'm originally from California, but this happened in Idaho. I have a brother, and I grew up with my father. My dad has always had a habit of sleeping with the lights on. One night, while he was asleep, he had an encounter with something. He suddenly felt a hand grab his leg. It startled him awake, but in that moment, he decided not to open his eyes. Something about the way the hand felt was wrong. Then it started lightly tracing his foot, almost as if it were trying to wake him up on purpose. That's when my father realized something was seriously wrong. He had a strong instinct that whatever was touching him was something evil, something powerful. Fear slowly crept through his body. He kept his eyes shut for about 5 minutes, but the presence never stopped touching his leg. Finally, he opened his eyes, and the moment he did, he froze. A black cat was sitting on his chest, staring straight at him. But this wasn't a normal cat. Its face looked twisted, malicious. The instant their eyes met, the cat suddenly leapt off his chest, ran to the corner of the room, and disappeared straight into the wall. My father watched it the entire time. He never lost sight of it, not even for a second. The cat ran into the wall and vanished. Terrified, he ran straight into the bedroom where my brother and I were sleeping. We woke up confused and scared, staring at each other as he told us to stay awake with him. We could feel the fear coming off of him, but he didn't explain what had happened. I don't think he even understood it himself. Eventually, he fell asleep, but not for long. He kept waking up and asked us to shake him awake if we noticed him trembling or sweating in his sleep. That night, he drifted in and out of sleep, but thankfully, the cat never came back. About a month later, my father finally told us the full story. We were shocked, but not long after that, something else happened. My father and I saw a shadowy figure about 3 to 4 feet tall at the same time. The moment I saw it, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. That was when my father decided we needed to move. Thankfully, my brother has never seen anything like this or had any similar experiences. But my father has had strange encounters like this since he was young, and even now, he's still searching for an answer. If you know anything about experiences like this or have any idea what it could have been, I would really appreciate hearing your thoughts.